Podcasting from a secret location deep inside the political colossus. This is Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance.
Part of the beauty of me is that I'm very rich. Let me tell you, I'm a really smart guy.
What's your name again? John Miller. And you work with Axelrod? Yes, that's correct.
Oh my God, they've got a madman on their hands.
We will have no truce nor parley with you or the grisly gang who work your wicked will. You do your worst, and we will do our best.
We've come to a turning point, a moment for hard decisions. If not us, who? And if not now, when?
It's 11:59 at Radio Free America, and this is Uncle Sam with music and the truth until dawn. Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the walls. The chair is against the walls.
This is Radio Free GOP with your host, Mike Murphy.
Well, we've had the big second debate, and, well, I'm depressed. You know what I'm for? Show trials. We're talking about the post-debate analysis, the state of the GOP in the race, and an interview with my pal, David Axelrod. It's all right here on Radio Free GOP.
He used to have a big career, but now he's had enough. Podcasting's like therapy. His shrink says it's great stuff. Radio Free GOP.
Welcome to Radio Free GOP. I am Mike Murphy. It is Tuesday, 2 days after the most depressing, dinky debate in the history of debates. Ugh, this is not good. The Republican resistance is winning, but the party is in rubble. That is not a good thing. Thank you, Trump. You've really been able to do it. Of course, it's all about you. It's not about the party. It's not about conservative ideas. It's just a grown-up Richie Rich on an ego trip. Let's recap. Let's see where we've been and where we might be going. First of all, last week, Trump was busy losing the normal way by being an oaf. You know, just going along. We are looking at the controversy over his taxes and the fact that he, legally, I will say, had a huge loss carry forward, and he probably hasn't paid taxes for 15 or 20 years. No wonder he's got the returns locked up. But then came the pervy tape, the atomic clock of creepy. Oh, that was something else. That tape was so rapey, I think Hugh Hefner would throw Trump out of a Playboy pool party at the mansion. He'd be disgusted. He'd have to get out rubber gloves and take the robe and have it burned and ban Trump forever. Oh, what a creepy, needy guy. And, of course, it was a huge bombshell, which led to finally the dam breaking and a lot of Republicans walking away because the Pauls and the polls know the truth. Trump has imploded. Now, it was a little late for some of them. A lot of us have been on this Trump thing for a long time because it wasn't hard to see coming. But I applaud anybody who takes the walk on Trump because you get a certain amount of heat in the party. I'm going to talk about that in a minute and why the heat may be a little overrated. But again, we will welcome converts to the Republican resistance, and I was proud to see everybody walk. I was hoping Speaker Ryan would make the move at that rally in Wisconsin that he disinvited Trump to, and I give Ryan credit for disinviting him. Ryan called him up and told him not to come. Trump threw a fit. It was quite a thing, and Ryan held his ground. Good for Ryan. Good for the speaker. But he should have put the final knife in Trump at the event because that could have led to a chain reaction, a real Trump meltdown in the debate, more defections, and then an RNC 9B vote to get a new candidate. Now, there was no way to really force Trump out. But if Trump had been shamed out of the race, and I think, like all bullies, his bluff can be called, we could have had the RNC convene, vote the delegates from each state again, and had an electable candidate. I think a Romney-Pence ticket would have been strongest, and I think it would have won that RNC contest. That would have led to a 2 or 3 point race and a whole new deal. Now, I know the Democrats all say, but the ballot's already printed. Hey, we're a superpower. We're the most vital democracy in the world. We can have an election if we want to. We know how to print ballots. And yes, we can get judges to order that we have an election because this is America. So it would have been cumbersome. It would have been hard. And yes, there are 10 or 20,000 cast ballots. But you know what? You can sign an affidavit and recast ballots. There was a workable path, difficult, but workable if the national will was there. But now it's all for naught. Because while Trump lost the debate, and any real poll shows that, not these crazy internet polls that the Trump lunatics send out, I got an email from the woman on television with the necklace made of bullets who they miss at the asylum, and I'm sure she'll be back soon. The basket weaving team is way behind. But this email she sent had all these crazy internet polls where people just click, be they Putin bots over in Eastern Europe or just people jabbing away at their internet. They're not real. It doesn't matter that the sample is 17,000. It's not, as you can learn on the Mark Mellman episode of this podcast, it's not a random sample, so it is statistically completely invalid no matter how large the sample is. Legitimate, statistically rigorous polling shows Trump losing the debate overwhelmingly. Now, I get it. Hillary was on defense the whole time. Nobody has ever needed a sharp line about bullies more than she did. I'm kind of stunned her enormous machine did not provide her with one. But she played it safe because she, unlike Trump, has something to lose, and the wild swings and the lurch-like creeping around the stage behind her, it played out badly for Trump. So while Hillary was in a defensive crouch and didn't really do herself any good at that debate, Trump lost it aggressively. Now, we're in this weird little nodal zone now because some people, particularly in the alt-right media, think Trump had a triumph. He won the debate. Why? Hillary was on defense. That is true. But two, Trump broke through with the issues that people really want to hear about. The stunt with the women before the debate, the rehashing some of the Clinton attacks. Some of that stuff is legit. There are real criticisms of her record. Fair enough. But Trump's style was so boorish and so rude and so awful, so unhinged, and on some of the tougher questions, so dramatically uninformed. There's no question that he failed yet again the commander-in-chief test. So why do people think that Trump had a comeback? Two reasons. One, the media is in the comeback business. We're going to sell more stuff and more viewership and clicks. That's more eyeballs, and somebody running a P&L at the top will smile. The commerce of it will be fed. But more importantly, the alt-right bubble that Trump is in has always wanted this debate. They've always wanted to run a campaign on the crazy stuff. Their biggest pipe dream last time was that Mitt Romney gave a banshee scream and turned to Barack Obama at the last debate and said, "You, sir, are a Kenyan socialist." And their wacky view of the world, which is a little too deeply permeated in some areas of my party, then all of a sudden Obama would have started sobbing like a child, and the whole country would have said, "Hey, wait a minute, we were wrong about him. We're for Mitt Romney." Now, it's a ludicrous, childlike dream of how a campaign works, but that does not stop the alt-right crowd. And now that they have a candidate who thinks the same Looney Tunes stuff they do, they're going to have this merry prankster happy campaign where they scamper across the country doing more and more of that stuff. We're going to have seance ads. "This is the voice of Vince Foster. She killed me on orders from Red China." It's going to be unbelievable. For cheap comedy, it'll be gold. For my party, a complete disaster. The polls know that, and the polls are proving it, which is why more are going to drop off Trump in a day or two after the polling comes back post-debate. These guys are checking their own districts. They're going to find Trump is in trouble. How do I know I'm right? How do I know it wasn't a Trump triumph and the alt-right Breitbart crowd and Trump did not have a huge win at the debate? Well, there's some polling. Now, there's the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, which is conducted by two heavily respected polling firms, one from the Republican Campaign War Room, POS, one from the Democratic one, Peter Hart and Associates. They show Trump 11 points down, which is a huge deficit in October, almost unseen in a presidential race. But wait, you say, that poll was conducted before the debate. And two, it was flawed. There's a conspiracy. And there's a lot going around the internet where they analyze the poll. And they show when you ask people the question of party identification, do you consider yourself a Republican, a Democrat, or independent? The numbers are more Democratic than the exit polls show last year. That's it. They've done it. It's a conspiracy. Well, I hate to rain on that parade, but here's how this stuff really works. The party ID question, when you ask people what party they consider themselves allied to, is not a registration question, and it's not locked in granite. It is an identification question. So if you were a Republican on the day you voted for Mitt Romney or Barack Obama in the last presidential election, and the exit pollster said, "What party you identify with?" you answered it. That number's not locked in stone. You may identify with a different party now because things change. People respond to what happens in the election. So here's a science experiment. Do you think more people are identifying Democratic right now than they did 4 years ago as we switch candidates from Mitt Romney to batshit crazy Donald Trump? Maybe that's had a little uptick in Democratic identification. I think so. That number, as political scientists will tell you, is an evolving number. It moves. It reflects what people think now in response to the campaign, not 4 years ago. So sorry, Trumpers, I know this breaks your heart and you'd love to have a rule where everything has to match up to the last exit. Not quite that way. Elections are living, breathing things because they involve living, breathing people who change their minds and react when we nominate a crazy candidate. So if you don't believe this, then I have an antidote for you. Attention, Trumpers, close your eyes, breathe slowly, stop breathing. Let your head go light. Let the oxygen be cut off a little more to your brain. And at that moment, click your heels twice and have a beautiful dream that Trump is now president. Because if you really, really wish for it, we know it'll happen. The other reason I know the polling is bad, beyond the fact that the Wall Street Journal NBC poll is methodologically legitimate, is I'm seeing some private polling data taken, wait for it, after the debate. This poll was half before the debate, half yesterday, Monday, after the debate. And guess what? Trump is still losing by double digits. So in a day or two, the private polling will come back to the members of Congress, and the official logo of the Republican Party will change from the elephant to the Edvard Munch screen painting, because they're going to see bad stuff everywhere. And Trump did not have a triumph in the debate. In fact, Trump has now become the guy America's decided to hate. Donald Trump, self-proclaimed super dude, has become America's biggest loser. So it's going to be a bumpy ride. We're going to have the crazy alt-right view of the world. Trump is going to be campaigning in a purple jumpsuit with Vince Foster's head on the back. It's just going to become a sad parody as Trump lashes out and more bad polls pile up in the media. Now, there could be a little comeback. He could get to only 8 points down. A little bit of Republican vote could come home, 7 points down. But he is in a terrible position, and Hillary has certain advantages. Now, which is why it's a big question for the Hillary campaign. Do they do another debate next week? Do they show up for the crazy? Or do they reach into her favorite politician of the past, I believe, Richard Nixon, another power Paul, and skip the debate like Nixon did with George McGovern when he had a big lead? I don't know. I doubt they'll do it. It's a little too strategically adventurous for them, but there's a case for it. And I discussed this with our guest, David Axelrod. Now, one last point. I promised in a tweet I would bring this up. Why are people so afraid of big bad Trump and the Republican Party? Well, there is a perception wildly supported by the media, where, as you know, if you listen to this podcast, I think 90% of what you hear is wrong, and inside the party, that if you offend Trump's supporters, you will be massively punished for it. Well, here's the problem. Trump doesn't have a big army. This is one of the great myths of politics. These reporters go to a rally with a few thousand people who self-select because they like his show or they love Donald Trump and think that's all of America. Well, the fact is you're seeing most of them there. Trump does less rally business than the Ice Capades. They sell a lot more tickets. It is a small niche audience. Trump got about 13 to 14 million votes in the primary, less than half the total number of Republicans. Today, a lot of those Republicans regret voting for Trump. In a poll I saw among Republicans only, that part of the sample, only 30% admitted voting for Trump in the primary, which is 14 points less than he actually got. There is some buyer's remorse. The Trump army is there, but it's much smaller. Most Republicans are not crazy about Trump at all. His unfavorable rating with Republicans is quite high, but they dislike the idea of a Hillary Clinton presidency so much. Plenty are holding their nose and voting for him, but a record number, particularly in this new polling, are not. Trump is way underperforming with Republicans. Here is a good case study. Mark Kirk, U.S. Senator, good guy, from Illinois, big Democratic state. Very, very, very hard to win in a presidential year. He is fighting in an uphill race for re-election, and he's doing a great job of fighting, and he's actually got a little chance, although the odds are stacked against him. Well, Mark Kirk came out against Trump several months ago. He said he was unfit to be commander-in-chief. Salute from the Republican resistance to Senator Mark Kirk for showing some bravery. But what happened? I'll bet the Trump army punished him. I'll bet they're going to stay home and never vote for Mark Kirk, right? Wrong. Latest polling shows that Mark Kirk is getting 92% of the Republican vote in Illinois. Here's the deal. An angry or disappointed Republican vote on Election Day is no better than a delirious one. And the price of getting deliriously happy base votes is losing every other voter and losing the election. The base vote is not a swing vote. It's not that fickle. It pulls the lever reliably. We have data that proves it. The idea of a Trump voter strike is the most overrated single thing in politics. Our guys ought to have a backbone injection and understand that and show a little courage, because after this election, we're going to have mirrors. People are going to have to look in, and we are keeping a list and checking it twice of who put the country first and who fell for the con man. That's why I'm looking forward to show trials. I want a full 10 men, ceiling fans, and the Home Improvement Commission, the whole deal. There's going to be a civil war in the party after this, and we're going to know where people were. Now, finally, a word about Trump supporters. A lot of people who support Trump are patriotic, hardworking, excellent Americans, and they do so with no malice at all. They've been caricatured a bit in the media. But when you look at the rallies, and again, they self-select people who decide to show up, the real hardcore of the hardcore, I see a lot of people saying and doing some offensive things. I saw a T-shirt with a C word on it. Now, I'm no Hillary Clinton supporter, but that is horribly offensive. And American politics deserves better. And let me just say, there is a thing, and it's got friends in both parties. It's not all Trump. But there is a thing called Dumbass America. And it's shown up, and it's showing some love for Donald Trump. So my view is, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, a wild-eyed liberal that hopefully this podcast will straighten out, or a conservative like me, it doesn't matter. On Election Day, Dumbass America needs to get beat. And that's why Donald Trump has to lose. Now, let's do a little commerce and pay a few bills.
Mike Murphy, podcasting sanity, Radio Free GOP.
Okay, look, we all know America has been loving the Private Equity Fundcast for nearly 3 years. But here at Radio Free GOP, we've been loving it since they became our first sponsor, and we're grateful to them. It is a good podcast. So if you're not a listener yet, let me knock a little sense in you and tell you why you ought to listen. I do. The Private Equity Fundcast is the only weekly podcast that goes inside, behind the scenes of the global private equity industry. They're your Sherpa. They're taking you on a journey here, and they're good. Jim Milbury and Devin Matthews, who are the two industry veterans who host the podcast, they're not only funny and honest, they're pros, and they talk about it. They tell you their secrets about how they buy and sell companies. Inside this refreshing and honest look, they talk about how they execute their business at their Chicago-based firm, Parker Gale Capital. You'll hear all about the art and science of the letter of intent. That is a big deal. Or, this one is always a hit, how to get a CEO job at a private equity-owned company. What are the tricks? What are they looking for? How do you communicate with the people who might hire you? There's nothing else like the Private Equity Fundcast out there, and private equity is huge and important. You want to learn about it. So check out the Private Equity Fundcast on iTunes or Google Play. One more time, that's the Private Equity Fundcast, the only one of its kind, on iTunes or Google Play. Now, Radio Free GOP is also partially brought to you by Ricochet.com, the smartest and most civil center-right community on the web. No trolls, we guarantee it. You become a member, you let your voice be heard, and you listen to lots of great podcasts. They produce a ton of them, all for just $5 a month. And Radio Free GOP listeners get their first month for free, so all you got to do is go to Ricochet.com/join. That's Ricochet.com/join and sign up today. Now, on the website, we've got all kinds of good things happening, RadioFreeGOP.com. One, we got the merch. You can get it. Our fine upside-down Jack Frost Elephant in Distress t-shirts. Soon to be a collector's item. I'm not sure we're going to print more, so get them while they're left. I think we're down to about 25% of our original inventory. And the new hit, the Halloween sensation, the Orange Menace t-shirt, guaranteed to infuriate the Trumper in your life and be a great souvenir of the election, as well as a scary, scary costume. You can't go wrong. All you got to do is go on RadioFreeGOP.com and buy some of the merch, help pay the bills around here. All the money that comes into this stuff we put back into the podcast. Now, we have a little button on there that says Amazon. You click that and we get a taste. We get dusted off. We get a little bit of what you spend on Amazon. Your prices stay the same. That can be very, very helpful. Finally, PayPal. Yes, we take monthly donations. You can throw a few bucks this way. Our electric bill is huge. The fleet of yes men I keep around here, very expensive. And our investor is hoping to break even after sinking money into this thing. Who's that idiot? Who is foolish enough to invest in this? Me. So again, we're trying to get to that break-even status. We're getting closer, but we need your help. It's all on RadioFreeGOP.com. Thank you very much. And don't forget, you want to send us a comment, an insult, anything you want, you just have to email us, comment@RadioFreeGOP.com. We're also on the Twitter for the kids. That's @RadioFreeGOP, or I'm there @Murphy Mike. And now, back to the show.
Fight for sanity in this crazy year on Radio Free GOP.
Our special guest is David Axelrod, a dear old friend of mine for many, many years, decades even. We've been close pals for a long time, even though we've been professional opponents, beating the brains out of each other in a lot of campaigns, but always having a close personal friendship. That's a lesson that I think could be learned more in politics, particularly on Capitol Hill. Now, I'm one of the few people who doesn't call him Axe because he's just too nice a guy to be referred to as a wood-chopping instrument. But he's a tough campaigner and a loyal Democrat and has had an amazing journey from Chicago politics all the way through to the White House. He's going to talk about all that, give his debate review, and help me figure out where this crazy election might be going. Here's my interview with Democratic super consultant David Axelrod.
It's time to ask some questions and go behind the scenes. Here's our latest interview. We'll try to keep it clean. Radio Free GOP.
We are here with my guest, my old friend and political opponent, but good friend in real life, the one and only David Axelrod. David, thank you for doing the podcast.
It's great to be with you here in the bunker at Radio Free Republican Party.
Yeah, it's getting a little crowded in here. There are a few more people taking refuge.
No kidding. Yeah, it seems like you're gonna have to do an add-on in addition to your bunker there.
We had a seat for Speaker Ryan, but he only made it halfway here.
It's early. There are 30 days left.
Yeah, and Trump just started attacking him. Well, we're talking a lot about Trump. We're taping this on the Monday after the debate, or as I like to call it, Republicans vomiting in their mouth day as we watch the franchise implode. But before we get to all that, let's do a little history here. I'm going to start with the question I ask everybody on the podcast. How did you get into this?
Into this podcast or into
No.
politics?
The podcast is that you lost that bet with me. But actually, I should do a commercial first. One of the reasons I do a podcast is I have two friends who do them. You are one, and you graciously had me on your podcast, and I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
On the Axe Files, which I highly recommend. And then my comedian friend Dana Gould has kind of a comedy one, but he's a political junkie, so I did the Gould one too. And next thing you know, I'm out crowding the airwaves of Radio Free GOP. And anyway, the question I ask everybody, this wacky world of politics, how did you get into it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I got into it very early, like freakishly early, in the sense that when I was 5 years old, John F. Kennedy came campaigning in my community, which was a housing development on the sort of Lower East Side of Manhattan, Midtown Lower East Side, called Stuyvesant Town, very famous housing development built for returning war veterans. And he came there 12 days before the 1960 election, actually campaigning for votes. It gives you a sense of how old I am, Mike, that I was witness to an election in which candidates were actually competing for votes in New York 12 days before the election. Now they just come through to raise money, But JFK came in the afternoon, a woman who looked after me when I was a kid while my mother was at work. This wonderful African-American woman named Jessie Berry heard that JFK was coming, and she took me out, put me on top of a mailbox, and I watched 20th Street, which is this huge boulevard that bisected Stuyvesant Town, fill with people. It normally was filled with cars, and that alone was unusual. And then, everybody watched with rapt attention as this very charismatic guy spoke, and his voice was bounding off of buildings, and it just seemed very, very important. And that was, my parents were interested in politics, but that was really what got me going. And 4 years later, when his brother Robert ran for the Senate in New York, I worked for him, not as the strategist, but I handed out a few leaflets in Stuyvesant Town for him. And throughout my childhood in New York, I was involved in campaigns, including, you should know, for a couple of Republicans who probably wouldn't be Republicans today. John Lindsay, who ran for mayor of New York.
I had Shrum last week on the podcast, and he worked for Lindsay,
He worked for Lindsay. Yeah, he actually worked for him. My favorite story about the Lindsay race was I was 10 years old, I didn't want to go to the Republican Party headquarters. I was from a family of Democrats, so I went to the Liberal Party headquarters in New York because you can run on multiple ballots there. And Lindsay was running as a Republican and a liberal because he was challenging sort of the Tammany Hall type candidate. And they sent me out to a corner to hand out leaflets, and some woman came up with a box of pastry, and she thought it was really cute. She asked me why I was doing it. I made my case. And she said, "Oh, this is so great that you're out here. Here, you take this." And I take this box of pastry back to the headquarters when I'm done giving out my leaflets, and we open it up, and there are the donuts and everything, and also a wad of cash in there. And so it was my first lesson in politics. The guy who ran the headquarters grabbed the cash and said, "Kid, you keep the donuts, and we'll take the cash."
And you made a mental note to move to Chicago later.
Exactly. That was perfect preparation for Chicago politics. And, then I came out here to Chicago to go to the University of Chicago and started writing about politics. That was in the era of Richard J. Daley. A really interesting time in Chicago politics, beginning of the Black independent political movement, and ended up working at the Chicago Tribune for 8 years during a very transformative period in the politics of the city that culminated in Harold Washington's election as mayor, the first black mayor. And then a guy named Paul Simon, who you may remember, was
bow tie, absolutely.
Yeah, he was the Orville Redenbacher of politics. He had a bow tie. And Paul, he was from a small town in southern Illinois, horn-rimmed glasses. He had these big jug ears. We used to joke about Paul Simon's plan for Lobel domination because his ears were so big. And but he was just a really principled guy. He fought for civil rights from a district that was closer to Little Rock than it was to Chicago, and he fought for political reform in the legislature at a time when that was very hard to do. And I really admired him, so I left the newspaper business and went to work for him, and we defeated a 3-term incumbent in 1984, Charles Percy, in a year when Ronald Reagan was carrying the state by almost 600,000 votes.
So you're the guy who killed. You're the guy who killed moderate republicanism in the U.S. because Percy was one of the old kind of school, like Bill Milliken in Michigan.
He was
the old moderate Republican.
In many ways, just a really admirable guy. He did something that has endured till this day. He set up a system to choose federal judges and prosecutors. And he had a screening panel of, citizens, law school deans, and so on, and like a blue ribbon panel. And now that's become the norm in Illinois for senators. And he fought for against housing discrimination, and he did a lot of good things. He just got caught up in the transformation. You remember a lot of moderate Republican senators, Clifford Case, Jacob Javits, Ed Brooke, lost in that era, and he was one of them.
Yeah, no, it was part of a sea change in the Republican Party as our demography changed too. So let me take you back to your newspaper days for a minute.
Yeah.
I read that they're remaking the front page, which is probably not a genius idea on Broadway because it's a pretty perfect movie a couple of times. But I always think of the Chicago Trib when I see that, particularly the later remake with Jack Lemmon and Mathau.
Yes.
I think one reason that Chicago folks come out with a really good understanding of politics is the politics of the city of Chicago. Can you walk our listeners through kind of the alderman system and the diversity?
Yes, well,
because that's really...
It is a pretty
special.
Byzantine system. We've got 50 wards here, and for generations, the ward committeeman was the sort of overlord of the ward, and he was the dispatcher of patronage and jobs and favors that came through the political organization and City Hall and other offices that the Democratic organization ran, and it was a very, very powerful force in our politics. But the committeemen then had precinct captains. There are 60, 70 precincts per ward, and there'd be a precinct captain in each ward, and that precinct captain would know each of the residents and would be there as sort of their de facto representative to government. They needed a trash can. That's who you'd go to. You needed other favors. Now, the argument, the reform argument, is people shouldn't have to pledge fealty to a political organization to get what they pay for with their tax dollars. And I was one of those reformers back in the 70s when I was writing about this stuff. Who I believed that strongly, and I still believe that, though. As I get older and as I watch sort of the devolution of government in certain ways, I wonder whether we over-reform. And there was this to-do in the debate last night about the movie Lincoln and Doris Kearns' wonderful book, Team of Rivals, and how Lincoln passed the 13th Amendment. I mean, Lincoln would have gone to prison for doing what he did back in the day to pass the 13th Amendment, dispatching favors and trading jobs and so on. I don't know. I think that we need to kind of reflect on whether we've gone so far as to remove from office holders the tools with which to govern. I think that's true in the Congress. We all were for the end of earmarks, and we kind of took away from legislative leaders and presidents some of the tools through which they were able to pass their program. There's a more than a respectable argument for why that's good, but I don't think it's an unalloyed good.
Yeah, look, I'm with you. I want to bring back smoke-filled rooms. We're rare in that the wide open primary system we have is very rare in Western democracies. Generally, there's a little bit more filtering so people can act in the interest of the party rather than the throes of the moment. And look, that Chicago system, it was interesting. I was in Singapore, which is kind of the world's friendliest dictatorship, but they have the same system. The local MPs have to go door to door, and if they don't have popular support because they get the garbage picked up and they respond to their constituencies, they get fired in the political system there. So there's a weird kind of connection, even though, they let the opposition party get 18 every once in a while.
Well, that's generous, because there were precincts in Chicago where organization candidates would get like 102%,
Well, the dead loved them so much they came back to cast a proud ballot.
Occasionally,
but I'll bet, there's always dead weight. 2/3 of those ward bosses had a very good idea what was going on the ground in their neighborhood. They were connected.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Look, the flip side of it, and the one that I think is concerning, is that there's an impetus for office holders to pad the bureaucracy in order to have more jobs to dispense,
right,
to hire people based on how they perform in the precinct rather than how they perform on the job. I mean, those are concerning things. But, in terms of the choice of candidates, it's interesting. Daley was very smart, in how, he certainly wanted his own people, and he slated more than his share of hacks, but he also, when he sensed public sentiment shifting, like in 1970, Everett Dirksen had died, and there was a fellow named Ralph Tyler Smith who was running for the Senate, and the Democratic state treasurer, Adlai Stevenson, announced that he was going to run for the Senate. And it was a direct challenge to the Daley machine. And Daley took a pilgrimage up to the Stevenson family farm in Libertyville, this being the son of the late, well, he wasn't late at that time, but yeah, he was late at that time, the Governor Stevenson, who was two-time presidential candidate. They had a farm in Libertyville, north of Chicago. Daley goes up there, and it was like a huge news story for Daley to make this pilgrimage there. But Daley went up there to ask him to be the candidate for the Senate because he knew he couldn't beat him.
Right.
And, in other times, in the 40s, the Jake Arvey, who was chairman of the Democratic Party in Chicago, slated Adlai Stevenson, his father, for governor, and a guy named Paul Douglas for the U.S. Senate. Paul Douglas had been a reform alderman, drove the machine nuts from the Hyde Park area where the University of Chicago is. He wanted to run for governor. Stevenson was an expert on foreign policy and wanted to run for the Senate. And Arvey flipped them because he figured Stevenson wouldn't mess with them as governor, and Douglas would be less of a nuisance as senator. And, they both won. And two of the most stellar public officials of their time. Stevenson did bring reform. Interestingly, Steve, the revenue director in state government in that administration, the one term that Adlai Stevenson served as governor, was Richard J. Daley.
Oh, interesting. I've been waiting for Hillary to resurrect the great old Adlai line about, you better stop lying about me or I'll start telling the truth about you.
Exactly.
It's the perfect Trump line. What's always interesting about these reform deals is when the reformers finally get in, they look around and say, hey, this machine toolbox is pretty damn good.
Yeah.
I remember in Jersey City, we'd always have the reform slate run against the crooks in office, and they'd win. And then 4 years later, there'd be a new reform slate because the old reformers were the new crooks, and the old crooks were the new reformers. So
the problem with the toolkit was the false bottom where the cash was stored. That was troubling to people. I interviewed, or I had on my podcast 4 months before he died, Abner Mikva. He was a great character. He got elected to the state legislature in the 50s. He was an ally of Paul Simons in the legislature from Hyde Park, from the University of Chicago area. Then he basically ran against the Daley Machine and won a seat in Congress, which was unheard of on the South Side. Daley redistricted him to the northern suburbs. Daley redistricted him and left him no district. Mikva moved to the northern suburbs and beat the Republicans for a seat the Republicans had held for like 100 years. I mean, he's one of the great politicians ever, and really, really both pragmatic and principled. But he told a great story about Paul Powell, who was the Speaker of the House when he and Paul Simon were in the House. Paul Powell then became Secretary of State, and he died, and he became famous in 1970 when he died because they found in his hotel suite in Springfield $800,000 in shoeboxes. And I said to Mikva, were you surprised when you read that story? And Mikva didn't skip a beat. He said, only that the amount was so small. So there's no doubt that graft can be an ugly thing. But there was something to party leaders who had a sense of responsibility, especially for these high offices, the people they chose.
They were ruthlessly pragmatic, but as you say, the incentive toward greed kind of takes over. One of my favorite movies is about machine politics, The Great McGinty. And
yes.
It's just incredibly hilarious, and it romanticizes it and makes it harmless and a comedy. But there is some truth to the pragmatism of it. But again, as you say, the problem's the greed. Did you have a favorite movie about machine or old school politics?
Well, The Last Hurrah, was a great book and a great movie. In the movie, Spencer Tracy played Frank Skeffington,
right?
The old mayor. It was based on Mayor Curley of Boston, and he really played the role so well. I highly recommend that movie to anybody who's interested in sort of the old machine model.
I have a fondness for it because my grandfather was an elected judge in Wayne County on the probate side, and I still have some of the old palm cards. It was a classic old thing: Goldberg for controller, Smith for deputy mayor, Murphy, Sullivan, Callahan, Brown for judge, and it was all the old balance. He has this great picture sent to him by Jim Farley. Judge Murphy, thank you for your work in Detroit. I mean, it's an interesting time, and for all its downside, it was organized. And can you imagine what those bosses, the old Republican bosses, would think now about a Donald Trump just coming out of nowhere?
Appalled, yeah. Because the truth is, they took it seriously. Richard J. Daley was deadly serious about governing. And, in the 50s, he was considered sort of a visionary mayor because he developed the city. He brought business to the city. He was an interesting amalgam, of the old and the new. And Richard Nixon, close to the time when he resigned, came to Chicago, and the only elected official who met him at the airport was Mayor Daley. And he said, I don't care who the president is, but the president of the United States is owed respect, the office of the president. And, there's just those old verities that have kind of gone by the wayside. So I just have to tell you the story about the machine. There was an alderman on the Northwest side, and he was an undertaker, and he ran 6 times for alderman, always under the same slogan, which was, he'll be the last to let you down. Which, you got to love that.
You do. The human side of it. There's a funny book, you may be familiar with it. You can buy it on Amazon for about $1.50 called You're the Boss by Ed Flynn, the old Bronx leader. Right? And it's his full-throated, it was, I think, published in the late 40s, 50. And it's his full-throated defense of bossism. And it's like a manual for would-be bosses. Always run your meetings on time and, don't have too many questions. It leads to disorganization. The thing should have been called Poll lever 2A for your regular Democratic organization. But it's actually kind of charming, and I highly recommend it for political junkies because it's like a time porthole into that thinking then. And most of them were, politics was a profession with a certain amount of professional order and organization and good purpose to it. You know, it's I don't know if it was that much worse than the chaos we have now. Let's shoot forward a little bit.
Okay.
You're sitting there in your office. You're a successful political consultant after the Simon race. You're doing a lot of races. And there's this, I guess, state senator, some troublemaker law professor who had some big ideas. You kind of walked us through the beginning of that and how it started?
I started this political consulting business media consulting business after about the same time you did. Probably I was a little bit earlier into it than you were, because I remember, you and Castellanos, the Young Turks, up and coming, and then I ran into you a few times, still have the bruises. But I started that in 1985, I guess. In 1992, I had some success. In 1992, I got a call from a friend of mine named Betty Lou Saltzman, who's kind of a doyen of liberal politics here in Chicago. And she said, I just met the most extraordinary young man. I think you ought to meet him. And I said, I'll meet anybody you want me to, Betty Lou, but why? And she said, because I know this sounds strange, but I think he could be the first black president of the United States. This was in 1992. I always joke that now when I go to the track, I take Betty Lou with me, because she saw it before anybody. But Barack Obama, he had just finished law school. He was the president of the Harvard Law Review. And he had come back to Chicago to run a voter registration drive, and I had lunch with him. And the thing that impressed me was I realized as I talked to him, not just that he was really bright, thoughtful, well-motivated, but here was a guy who could have written his ticket at any law firm or corporation in America. He was that sought after. He had been written about in the New York Times because he was the first African-American president of the Harvard Law Review. And instead of cashing in, he chose to come back to Chicago, ran a voter registration drive, became an associate in a small civil rights firm, taught at constitutional law at the University of Chicago. It struck me, you probably have the same perception. The world of politics basically divides into two cohorts. The larger one is of people who run for office because they want to be something. And then there's this smaller, more admirable cohort of people who run for office because they want to do something. He was clearly in that camp. And we stayed close. He ran for the state senate. I wasn't involved in that. He ran for Congress and lost, and I wasn't involved in that. And then in 2002, I was going through an existential crisis in my own career because one of my former clients, whose name you'll probably recognize, named Rod Blagojevich, was running for governor, and he had asked me to do his race. I liked him. He was a very pugnacious guy up from the neighborhood, had a strong working class sensibility, and I worked for him when he ran for Congress. But I had some question as to whether he should run for governor. I said, well, why do you want to run for governor? He said, well, you can help me figure that out. My basic rule of thumb is if candidates need you to help them figure out why they're running for an office, that they shouldn't be running for the office.
Yeah, I had a guy come to my office with a road atlas and say, help me figure out a district to run in.
That's a bad sign. And so I walked out on that one, and I didn't work for him. But I could see by the summer of 2002 that he was going to win. And he was going to win with a state-of-the-art campaign that was pretty cynical. I mean, he ran as a reformer because the former governor, or the sitting governor at that time, George Ryan, was already embroiled in scandal that would send him to prison.
Yeah, there was a stretch there when your Illinois governors on both sides were taking down crime from the inside, working undercover.
Bipartisan, we sent governors of both parties to prison.
I always said Blagojevich was the fifth Beatle, the corrupt one.
But I was depressed because he was running against a guy named Jim Ryan, who had no relation to George, who was a very decent guy. He was the attorney general of the state. He was a very devout Catholic and very conservative, and his views were much different than mine. But there were a few things, like he had been a former prosecutor. He took a pretty strong stance on guns, which in a Republican context was brave even then. He was honorable, and Blagojevich just ran circles around him. And I started thinking, maybe I'm just not cynical enough to be in this business. And just about that time, Barack called me and said, I got one race left in me. He had lost a congressional race by 30 points. And so He was broke, and he said, I told Michelle, I got one race left in me, and if it doesn't work out, then I promise I'll get a real job and make a living. And he said, I want to take a shot at the Senate. He was a first-rate guy. Everybody recognized that, but considered kind of a third-tier candidate because he didn't have any money. He was named Barack Obama. This was a year after a guy named Osama bin Laden had taken out the World Trade Center. You know, he was an African-American from Chicago. We had elected an African-American senator in 1992, Carol Moseley Braun, but that was one of the few times in modern American history when African Americans had gotten elected to the Senate. So for all those reasons, you know, it was a long shot.
But he probably knew, and you knew, that if he could pass the credibility test in the Democratic primary, there was a hunk of vote if they could find him.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he'd have a base, and he'd be top two.
It was going to be a presidential year, 2004. There was an incumbent, Peter Fitzgerald, who was a Republican, but he ultimately didn't run. The real issue was that Carol Moseley Braun was thinking of waging a comeback. And had she done that, Barack Obama could not have run for the U.S. Senate. This whole story would not have ever unfolded. Instead, improbably, she decided to run for president. Maybe a day or two after she announced that, Obama announced that he was running for the Senate. Even before he announced he was a putative candidate, and he made a speech a few weeks before the Senate voted on the war in Iraq that was one of the most prescient critiques of why we shouldn't go that anybody had given at that point. And so, you know, I learned a lot about him through that because that was entirely his own speech and his own thought. State senators don't have a big foreign policy staff.
Did Trump call to congratulate him on his principled anti-war position at the time as a fellow opponent?
I'm glad that Barack wasn't a Howard Stern listener, or he might have been turned by Donald Trump on that one. He would go down to deep southern Illinois, and he would, you know, I get a call from the guy who was traveling with him, who was his body man, who'd say, yeah, we had a great visit to this VFW hall in this all-white southern town, essentially. And, you know, and Barack, he'd call me at night, and I said, wow, that's surprising. He said, why? And I said, well, you know, black guy named Barack Obama, deep southern Illinois. I thought it might be challenging. He said, no, you don't get it. They're just like my grandparents from Kansas. And I talk about my grandfather who was in Patton's Army and my grandmother who was a Rosie the Riveter. And I realized, you know, this guy felt comfortable in any room. I mean, he felt comfortable there. He felt comfortable in an inner city church. He felt comfortable in a Tony suburb. And that made him such an unusual figure in a very polarized political environment. And we had just an incredible campaign. And then you saw the speech at the convention in 2004, which was galvanic.
Yeah, that lit the national fire and really celebritized him within the party. And then it was a long, hard path. I always thought he could win that primary with Hillary because all the Washington conventional wisdom was, oh, she's got the organization, which is almost always a canard. And,
yes.
You know, it's all paper tie. I remember I would bump into you and I said, I'm making money on bets. Don't let me down.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is what
primary.
motivated me. I knew that your ass was hanging out there on this one, and I didn't want to let you down. But look, I think you and I both know that you can make a lot of money in politics betting against the conventional wisdom. Because the conventional wisdom is always predicated on what happened the last time.
Yeah, exactly. And the closer they are to Washington, the less they know.
Yeah, well, I learned that in my 2 years in the White House. I always felt like I was looking at America through a periscope. When I came, you know, I was so happy to get home. I always called myself a Chicagoan on assignment. You know, I always thought I was a more effective consultant and strategist because I lived in the middle of the country where people didn't talk about the stuff they talk about in Washington. I'll never forget when the Monica Lewinsky story broke and a bunch of reporters called from Washington and said, well, he's going to have to quit, isn't he? And I went to lunch at Manny's, which is a deli. I go there to clog my arteries and clear my head. And the cashier there, Helen, was an old woman, blue-haired old Polish woman. And she called me over and she said, this guy Clinton, and I said, yeah. She says, I think he's trying to help me. You know, she was someone who was working because she got Medicare. But she and her husband couldn't survive. They had big additional medical needs and she had expenses. And so she worked. And she said, I think he's trying to help us. And I said, yeah. And she says, so why don't they get off his ass? I don't give a damn about his sex life. She says, he's trying to help us. And I call all those reporters back and say, you better get out on the road here, because I think this thing is more complicated than you guys think it is.
I'll never forget, I was on the Meet the Press roundtable back in the old days of Russert, and Carville was on, and James was doing a full-throated defense of Hillary in the primary, and I was saying, and this was way before Iowa, no, they don't want her, he's changed, you watch, if he gets south, he's unstoppable. And Carville was doing a good job, but he had all the canards, she's, a worker, and she's got the organization. But the minute the show was over, because he had to, or, he would have been in a vat of acid. Back at headquarters in the Get Even room, he pulls me aside and he said, if that horse can get out of Iowa, there's no stopping it. And
which is exactly what we thought.
Exactly
too.
What happened, yeah.
Yeah. We spent 83 days in Iowa in 2008, in 2007. And we were scorned by people in Washington saying, she's 30 points ahead in national polls and they're spending all this time in Iowa and, they don't know what they're doing. As often happens, the donors summon the candidate to tell him he needs a new team. But we had a very well-conceived plan and we felt we could win Iowa and that the only way he could win was to win Iowa. And the interesting thing was there were so many reasons why that was true. One of them was, until we won Iowa, she was actually beating us among African-American voters. And it wasn't that they didn't appreciate Obama or the fact that he was African-American. They really doubted whether white America would support him. And it took winning the lily-white Iowa caucuses, and almost the day after we won the Iowa caucuses, we shot into the lead in South Carolina. It had this extraordinary impact on the African-American community around the country.
Yeah, nothing works like winning early. You just get on rocket fuel. I'll never forget. I was there because we've been friends for a very long time. We've run races against each other, and then we sneak off and continue, even though we're trying to murder each other. It's like that cartoon of the sheepdog and the wolf. But I was in Iowa, and I tracked you down that morning, caucus morning, and I said, I think your life is really about to change.
Yeah.
And I have this great picture because you clearly hadn't slept in a few days. You had this hangdog look. I think I sent it to you. I've been doing this for a long time, taking like black and white portraits on the road. And sure enough, next thing I know, you're David Axelrod.
Yeah, well, let me just say, I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that a few thousand votes one way or the other is the difference between being a genius and being a dope. I always think about my old buddy Bob Shrum, who I know has been on your podcast. Bob is a brilliant guy, one of the most creative and interesting people that I've ever met in politics. He was doing Al Gore's race in 2000. Al Gore lost the state of Florida by 537 votes. If Al Gore gets 1,000 more votes, Karl Rove, also a brilliant guy, would be a male consultant in Austin. And Bob Shrum would be a legend.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the fickle nature of this business.
We'll be right back. But first, we have to do some commerce.
One reason I think people enjoy Radio Free GOP, other than being part of the Republican resistance so they have their honor intact after this train wreck of an election, is that it's about learning. That's why I have the guests tell stories about how they get started. I think people like to learn from hearing other people's experiences. Well, that's why I'm such a fanatic for the Great Courses Plus. I mean, I love this product. Let me tell you what they do. They search the country far and wide to find the very best college professors, and they bring them into their studio and they record their best and most effective lectures. That gives you, through the miracle of modern digital technology, the ability to attend some of the best college lectures in the country and learn a lot. So if you're a lifelong learner like I am, you got to check out the Great Courses Plus. Every single topic you can imagine is covered. You want to take better pictures? You can learn about photography. You want to understand political polling better and why the polls tend to be different between different pollsters? Courses in statistics. It's all there. History, politics, the sciences, anything you're interested in. I've been really enjoying Masters of War, History's Greatest Strategic Thinkers. In this business of politics, there's a lot of talk about political tactics, but not necessarily grand strategy, which is more important. If you want to learn about grand strategy, you can be taught a lot by history. what the great strategic battles of the past have been, how key military campaigns and battles affected that. It's all interrelated, and there's so much to study there, from people like Machiavelli to even Chairman Mao. So this course, Masters of War, Greatest Strategic Thinkers, is very applicable to politics and to learn about strategy. That's why I'm liking it so much. So the Great Courses Plus has all these interesting lectures, and you should try it out because I think you'll like it. And I'm happy to say, for Radio Free GOP listeners, we have a special offer. Here's the deal. If you sign up for the Great Courses Plus today, they're going to give you an entire month of unlimited access to their entire library for free. Now think about that. They give you a skeleton key to hundreds of the best college courses in America that you can watch on your laptop, on your iPhone. You can listen in the car, whatever your mobile device might be. You get total access for a month. It's the keys to the kingdom, and there's no better way to try this product out. So all you have to do to start your free month today is go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/RFG for Radio Free GOP. One more time, write this down. Go online to thegreatcoursesplus.com/RFG. You will thank me. This is a very cool product. And one thing about very cool products, they tend to make me hungry. When I'm learning a lot, I'm starving. So what's the answer to that? Blue Apron. Let's say you're starving and you feel like a little Thai green curry chicken and squash, or perhaps roasted pork steamed buns with black garlic mayonnaise and spicy cabbage stew. You ever thought you could make something like that? I didn't. I thought the only person I'd meet is the fire marshal when I was done trying in the smoldering wreckage of my kitchen. Well, that's why Blue Apron is so great. They understand that the key to good food is good ingredients, so they source it from the best possible places, and they also know that pre-portioning the food, in other words, giving you the right amount so when you cook it's all kind of pre-arranged, is the key to letting lunks like me learn how to cook really, really good food. It's a pretty cool product. For less than $10 per meal, Blue Apron delivers seasonal recipes along with those pre-portioned ingredients to your door so you can make delicious home-cooked meals. Now, they know when you cook with the great ingredients, you get a great taste, and they also know that the recipes they give you are easy to follow. I've done it. I've cooked stuff with Blue Apron, and in under 40 minutes, I not only didn't burn down the house, I made some pretty good food. So it's really that easy. Now, one thing they're very proud of is the variety. They don't repeat recipes. They basically in an entire year will not repeat a recipe. But, and I like this part, you keep the recipe card. So if you decide you really like a meal, like you say, you know what, I've never had crispy chicken Milanese with warm Brussels sprouts, celery, and potato salad before, and I liked it, but they're not going to repeat it. What do I do? What you do is you take the recipe card and you can make it anytime you want. They're also very flexible about delivery. You pick when they deliver. You customize your recipes each week based on what you want. You choose the delivery options to fit your needs. There's no weekly commitment. You only get the deliveries when you want them. And again, it's all step by step. You get great ingredients, pre-portioned, you get the instructions, and you can do it in under 40 minutes. So I think you're going to like it. What you got to do, go to the internet, check out this week's menu, and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to, here it is, blueapron.com/RFGOP, Radio Free GOP. Again, that's blueapron.com/RFGOP. Now, that last part's important because that's how they know we sent you, and that helps pay for the show. And every once in a while, they send us a chicken drumstick, too, because these guys, they know good food. So remember, you'll love how good it feels and tastes to create incredible home-cooked meals with a little help from Blue Apron, so don't wait. Go online today, blueapron.com/RFGOP. Blue Apron, it is a better way to cook. Now, let's go back to my chat with David Axelrod.
So after we left Iowa, the day you saw me, we took off that night when we went to Iowa for New Hampshire, and we got a lesson in politics in that we came as a conquering army, figured we'd scoop up the rewards 5 days later of winning Iowa by winning New Hampshire. We toured the state like a conquering army. Hillary Clinton got very close to the ground and did what she hadn't done the previous year, which is start really relating to people in a very visceral way and being much more revealing of herself. And we lost, you know.
Yeah, and it's the great slogan in New Hampshire, fuck Iowa.
Exactly. Well, and I think there was another element to it, too.
Oh, yeah, there was.
I really actually believe in the good sense of the American people. I mean, check with me on November 9th, but I think people looked at Barack Obama and they saw lots that they admired, but they knew that he was just a few years out of the Illinois Senate, and I think they wanted to see more. I think they didn't want the play to end in the second act. They wanted him to run the whole gauntlet, because at the end of the day, these presidential races, they're proving grounds. They're a long audition for the toughest job on the planet. And, you know, I always say they're like MRIs for the soul, and the longer you go, the more people get to know you. I think we're seeing some of that now. And I know Obama felt that way, that he talked to this group. We had a fundraiser set up for the day after the New Hampshire primary in 2008, and it was supposed to be a big triumphant event. And, you know, we showed up and everybody was like, looked like people who had been hit in the face with a pie. And, you know, everybody's downbeat. And Obama said, listen, I know everybody's disappointed. So I'm disappointed too. He said, but you know what? We were like Icarus flying too close to the sun. He said, change doesn't happen this easily. He says, you got to fight for it. And he says, this was a message to us. So we got to get back to work, get close to the ground, make our case. And then he said, let me tell you why it's important. And he went into his, and by the end, everybody was on their chairs. And, you know, he just turned the whole event into something that from this morbid kind of session into a rally.
Look, voters and presidentials, I am completely convinced, once they find somebody they fall in love with, or, you know, somebody moves out front, they knock them on their ass to see if they can get up again.
Yes.
It's part of the process. It's a narrative. It's the great 3-act structure where the hero gets obstacles, the hero gets knocked down, the hero gets back up, learns, improves, gets finally, you know, what they're after on the quest.
Our big moment was really the Reverend Wright thing, where, you know, there were a few days there where, you know, a lot of people thought that his campaign might implode because of this video of his pastor making these incendiary speeches. It gave all those people who wanted to get race into the story an opportunity. And this story broke on a Thursday. He's in the Senate all day. On a Friday, he comes back. He had a couple of editorial boards on something else, and then he did cable TV, and he got a sense of how hot the story was. And he called David Plouffe, our manager, me, and said, I want to give a speech on race. And we'd been holding him off on that. He had been wanting to do that for a long time. He said, and I want to do it no later than Tuesday. This is Friday. And he says, and I have to write it. And I said, well, you know, you're campaigning all day tomorrow. We've got a shoot on Sunday. We have to do a film shoot. And then you're campaigning all day in Pennsylvania on Monday. He said, don't worry about it. I know what I want to say. Just set it up. So we set it up for the Constitution Center in Philly on 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning. We figured if you're going to go down on a big stage, you know. Saturday night, he dictated an outline to his speechwriter, John Favreau. Favreau sent something back, but it was really skeletal. Sunday night, he puts his kids to bed at 10. He works till 3 in the morning, Obama did. Has half a draft written. We take off for Philly the next day at 8:30, or for Pennsylvania. He campaigns all day. We get to the hotel at 9:30, still half a speech written. And 12 hours later, he's going to give a speech that could determine the fate of his candidacy. And he goes to his room, and he finishes the speech, and he sends it to a few of us. I wake up at 3 in the morning, having been in the bar all night, medicating myself against the impending doom. I'm standing in the dark, flipping through this speech on my BlackBerry, and I emailed him back and said, this is why you should be president. Because under extraordinary pressure, he wrote what may be one of the great speeches, certainly one of the great speeches on race in American political history. And when we got there the next day, Mike, I'm in the green room with him, and everybody's tense. You know, reporters are descending on Philly like buzzards, thinking this could be the end. All of his close friends are there, and some of them are just beside themselves. And he says to me, you know, I know everybody's tense. He says, but I'm going to go out and give this speech, and either people will accept it or they won't. And if they don't accept it, then I won't be president of the United States. He said, that's not the worst thing. He said, at least I'll have said what I think needs to be said. And that's worth something. And he goes out and he makes the speech. And, those are the moments when you learn about your candidate. Those are the moments when you can see whether someone can handle the withering pressures of being president of the United States. I didn't know when that campaign began whether Barack Obama could be president, whether he had the mettle, the sort of the internal fortitude that was necessary. And, I learned along with everyone else. And all the qualities I saw in the campaign came into play during the presidency.
I remember in McCain 2000, after we lost South Carolina and went from momentum to trouble, somebody came up to McCain. We were on our way. There'd been no sleep. We'd flown in the middle of the night to Michigan, the next primary, which was our comeback hope. And somebody cornered McCain in tears about, oh my God, you lost to South Carolina. And McCain just kind of laughed and said, yeah, well, I look at it this way. I used to stay at a hotel that did not put a mint on the pillow. There are worse things than losing a lousy primary.
Yeah.
And off he went to win Michigan, actually, against significant odds. So let me ask you one last Obama question, because you've been asked every Obama question. But this is for the campaign hacks and assorted political junkies who tend to listen to Radio Free GOP. What was the worst day of the campaign? The hardest, worst day?
The worst day of the campaign was when there were very down times during the 2007, when people were calling for our heads and so on. But
the polls, right.
Yeah, all of that. You have to endure that. I mean, one thing you learn, I would say to all your political junkies and future presidential campaign operatives, campaigns are like, I just did a piece for The New Yorker about the Chicago Cubs. And what I realized when I was down there in spring training was that baseball seasons are like presidential campaigns. They're long. They have ups and downs, and you're being watched by millions of people, all of whom think they can do it better than you, and are free with their advice. And you have to be able to tolerate the ups and downs in order to be successful. But one of the real downs was we thought we could finish Hillary off in Texas and Ohio. There was in March a Texas and Ohio primary. I think it was March, beginning of March, and Bill Clinton had said publicly, if we lose either of these, she will have to withdraw. And we poured $20 million into those states, and we spent, and we really kind of cut corners. We probably did some things that were sort of antithetical to our general approach to campaigns in terms of the kind of mail we sent and so on. And we lost them both. And we were on the plane back to Chicago, and he's there, Michelle's there. No one's talking. It's just, which is really uncharacteristic. It was dead. And as he's leaving the plane, he said, I want to see everybody in the office tomorrow afternoon at 2 or something like it was. I forget the exact time. And we thought, well, this can't be good. And we all show up not knowing whether we're going to walk out of there decapitated. And he came in and he sat down. He had his yellow legal pad in front of him, which is what, he always kind of takes copious notes the night before these kinds of meetings and writes down all of his questions, concerns, thoughts. And he says, look, he said, I can think of a dozen things I could have done better in the last 2 weeks. And you all can too. So I'm not here to fix blame. We share all of that, but let's figure out what went wrong and how we fix it moving forward. And we had a very productive meeting for 2 hours. He got up, he walks out, and he stops and he turns and he says, look, I'm not yelling at you guys. I want you to understand that. And then he takes another step and he turns around and says, of course, after blowing through $20 million in 2 weeks, I could yell at you. He says, but I'm not yelling at you. And he laughed and he walked out the door. And you know what? Everybody would have run through a wall for him at that moment.
Because he knows you guys feel worse than he could ever make you feel.
Right.
Good candidates understand that about their staffs.
Or baseball managers, or, among his good qualities, I think one of the greatest was that when we were at our lowest, he was at his strongest. And that was true in the presidency as well. After we lost the midterm elections in 2010, a mere 63 seats in the House. I always point out that Roosevelt lost, I think, 70 1938 or something, 1938 or so, but more than us. I said we were better than Roosevelt. But we come in and everybody's hanging crepe on the White House, and he comes in with his list of things he wants to get done in the lame duck, and we're like, did you see the newspapers? Did you watch the news? And he said, yeah, we got our asses kicked, but he said, but we still have a job to do here, so let's figure out how we get it done. And we ended up having the most productive lame duck session maybe ever. And so, that's a great quality in a leader.
Yeah, and it makes the group a lot better. I remember Angler, first term, 1 year in after the Lafayette Clinic thing, which I won't go in, our
Yes.
numbers dropped down. The reelect was like 18, and Angler, who hated polls, was like, all right, so I'm now as unpopular as a serial killer. Is that the bottom line? And we go, yeah. Well, who else should I kill? Give us 5 tough problems. We're doing them now and take the hit because I'm already dead, and then we come back. What are you all crying for? So I got to ask you, because we've heard the good, but this is true of every candidate. I don't want to get you in trouble, but when was he a pain in the ass? When you have every candidate, there's a time where, God, if we don't get it's eggs. I remember a guy once, I saw the field guy walking out of the headquarters wearing a sandwich because it was chicken salad, not tuna salad. And I'm not saying our fine president would do anything like that, but there's got to be something he was a pain in the ass about once in a while as a candidate.
I mean, I'm sure if I thought real hard, I could come up with one. But the reason I'm not in politics anymore, or at least one of the reasons I'm not in politics anymore, is that I knew that I could not find a candidate as easy to work with as him. I couldn't find a partner. I mean, one thing I will say is I'd been in presidential races before, and what they taught me was do not go to work for a candidate unless you have a really deep bond of trust, unless that you know them well, they know you well, and that when things go badly, they will stick with you. But I honestly, I found him, occasionally, it's still an issue. I mean, he just doesn't like the discipline of give a 30-second answer, give a 60-second answer, get your lead thought up front. He backs into this stuff. He's very Socratic. He's very professorial. So that, we used to quarrel about that all the time. But you know what? In the big scheme of things, that's kind of small potatoes. He was as good a client as I've ever had. I've had some really good clients, never one better than him. And, I feel really blessed. I mean, it was like a dream journey with him. So that was why I quit, because I said, I can only be disappointed after this.
Right, only downhill. Let's shoot forward and get our popcorn and do debate review. It was last night. The country survived it
All
barely.
the popcorn has been thrown, I think.
The popcorn would actually kind of molt and turn rotten watching the debate. It came out of the screen.
It was it was a grinder, man. It was not a very edifying event.
I thought she was not at her best, but it didn't matter because she had something to lose and he didn't. And, he was the cornered swinging wildcat.
She was there to do what she had to do. She wasn't going to do anything spectacular. And she didn't need to do anything spectacular. We saw the polls that came out today, that NBC Wall Street Journal poll, which I think is among the best of the public polls, shows her opening up an 11-point lead in the four-way, a 14-point lead in the two-way, which is almost unheard of in presidential politics in the modern era. If he were rational and you were advising him, you would say,
jump in the lake.
If you really think you are going for the win, you got to go in there and you got to eat humble pie in a big way and really express to people in a way that's believable a sense of responsibility, a sense of awareness of why what you said is so disturbing to so many. That's the advice I would have given. But I also knew that that's not his psyche. That's not within his emotional range. And so I really think that if there was even a pulse, that pulse was extinguished in the first 15 minutes of the debate when he had a chance to address this, and he gave a kind of perfunctory, it was just locker room talk answer. And
he doesn't really think anything was wrong other than, maybe I used the wrong word. He's just incapable because he's, a nutty narcissist weirdo. I think what's happened is, and I'm sure there's a parallel in the Democratic Party, but there have always been this kind of hodgepodge collection of freaks and kooks. It reminds me of the old, speaking of Chicago, Jeff McNelly editorial cartoons in the 80s of the United Nations, where there'd be like the rabbit with a pot on his head and the guy in the straitjacket. He had the greatest UN gallery of rogue cartoons ever. Well, there's that group in both parties, and what that group always dreams about is if only we could run it our way, get rid of these know-it-alls and tell the real truth. Like, their view of the last campaign was Romney lost because he didn't turn to Obama at the debate and say, "You, sir, are a Kenyan socialist." Because that would have turned everything, and the country would have, immediately said, "Oh my God, what were we thinking?" So, but now that crowd, the Breitbart News crowd, Kellyanne, who's really, for all the media veneer about savvy consultants, she's never done major races. She's from like the Michelle Bachmann campaign. Right. They now have a guy who thinks that way, and most of them think that way. So they get to do the Lost Weekend, the crazy ride. We're going to be doing a spot with the Trump campaign will be doing a spot with the ghost of Vince Foster. It's true. She killed me. That'll be the big Halloween spot. And you can see at the debate, that's where we're going to be.
Well, the fact that they brought those 4 women there and did the thing a half hour before this was, it was a Breitbart production.
And so now we're in for that ride. Well, the panic in the Republican world. The problem we have is too many of our electeds think base voters are swing voters. I mean, my favorite is Mark Kirk in Illinois. He's got an uphill race, incumbent senator running for re-election, a Democrat
I would say
state
greatly
Democrat.
Uphill.
Yeah, greatly uphill, but a pretty good guy. And
a good guy who's had a lot of struggles.
He took on a stroke and has made a big recovery.
It's tough for him.
So he came out against Trump months ago. So does that mean all the Trump supporters, all the Republicans have abandoned Mark Kirk? No, I've seen brand new polling. He's pulling 92% of Republicans. So the idea that people can't walk a little bit, that the, quote, base is going to punish them and implode and roll away, there's just no historical example for that. A delirious base ballot, lever being clicked with your name on it, is equivalent mathematically to a grumpy one being clicked. But our guys have forgotten this message, so they're terrified. Even Ryan, who, I've got the Grand Rabbi of Jerusalem on hold trying to explain to me the logic of, well, I endorse the guy, you could vote for him, but I won't appear in public with him. That one will take weeks to figure out. It's killing them. And I have to admit, maybe I'm just bitter Murphy today, but I am just disappointed that our leadership is not tougher on this thing because Trump is transparently an unqualified fraud.
Well, Ryan certainly stepped away from. I agree with you. This is an awkward construction, and I guess it's to maintain the notion that as the leader of the party, he can't officially withdraw his endorsement of the nominee of the party. It's out of respect for voters or something. But he certainly cut him loose today, and it wasn't lost on Trump, who took to his favorite forum, Twitter, to castigate Ryan. I just, even as we cover the sort of circus atmosphere of the next 30 days, I think the discussion is going to turn to what's going to happen next. And for the Republican Party, this is going to be really, really difficult to put the thing together again. I look at Paul Ryan; he's going to lose almost all of his moderates. Moderates in today's context. He's going to have a more reactionary caucus who basically don't. He wants to do infrastructure. They think that's spending and pork. He wants to do, God forbid, immigration reform, and they won't let him do it. Now, he could do those things if he does them in conjunction with Democrats, but, he would pay a tremendous toll for that, maybe ouster.
I'm a big fan because he is in it for the right reasons, and he knows conservative policies will make a better country. But I'm going to send him a biography of Joseph Stalin because the only speakers who can force that place to dance rule mostly by fear, and that is not Ryan's style, which means the Freedom Caucus is going to jerk him around like crazy. And you're right, he's going to lose some allies now in the elections.
More than that, he's going to lose his standing. I mean, I think that if he genuinely wants, if he may not want, it's not insane not to want to be president of the United States. Okay, so he may not want to be president of the United States, but I'm not sure that you could be Speaker of the House in the next 4 years and expect to be the Republican nominee for president in 2020.
No, I agree. The incentives are opposite.
Right.
And I'm not sure he does want to be president. I think he'd love to be a reformed conservative speaker, but he's going to have to go to the Iron Fist way to tame that caucus, or it's going to eat him alive.
Yeah, he came to the IOP, the Institute of Politics, on which you sit on the board, and that I founded at the University of Chicago, and had a really good session with students a year or two ago before he was speaker, and it was an impressive exchange, and it was the kind that I like to have there. Because, you had obviously a bunch of kids in that room who didn't necessarily agree with him on some stuff, but it was a really respectful conversation. I really gained admiration for him watching that meeting.
So what happens now? I mean, you're over at CNN. I work for NBC. The media business likes a race, and some of the pundits were giving Trump a tremendous comeback because he excited the vote that would vote for a bucket of cement with an R on it, not nearly enough to win. But the polls closed to 7 or 8 because structurally it's more of a 6 or 7 point race with Trump still working hard to lose. Do they write the huge Trump comeback? Do we have a Democratic panic? What's life like in another 5 or 6 days?
I don't know if there's another turn in this wheel now. I mean, he will come back. I think there could be some snapback in these polls. These polls are so outlandish. I think you're getting a trough now, off of the tape story. And, but maybe I'm wrong. The story may become now just watching him burn the village,
Yeah.
He is not going to come in for a smooth landing here. And I think he's going to take a whole bunch of folks with him. And, there's nothing Donald Trump likes less than being depicted as a loser. I think this is why he had those crazy weeks after the conventions when he was deemed a loser in the battle of conventions and was, manhandled in the Democratic convention. And then again after the first debate, when he spent a week talking about Miss Venezuela.
Yeah, he doesn't handle that well at all.
No. And so, I think these stories that say he's done and Republicans exiting in droves are only going to incite him to fight more viciously and harder. I just think that becomes, he's in a vicious circle here where the more he does that, the more he drives away any marginal voters who are left.
He's just going to do the Bender campaign now for the alt-right, and they're all going to have a great time burning down the entire party and the house and anything else they can set fire to.
You, my friend, are going to have to clean up the beach afterward. You're going to have to pick up the bottles. And
the title of this episode is Show Trials. We're making a list, and we're going to have a civil war, and I'm to the point where I'm looking forward to it because there are a lot of dead wood to wipe out. But question for you. Should Hillary reach into the old Nixon playbook, which I think she might have some secret admiration
That's always
for?
a loaded question. But.
No, I'm kind of a Nixon fan, so I'll say this. Should Hillary, who is a power politician, reach into the good Nixon playbook, as Nixon handled McGovern, and basically say, you know what, on the third debate, I'm not going. I'm going to send 3 psychiatrists, Trump, because that would be better for you and better for the country, and shut him down. It's tempting.
It is. Well, I think if he behaves as I suspect he might in the next 10 days, she may have impetus to do that.
And cover, really, if he's
right.
taken, if he's going to just do the National Enquirer tour for 4 days, we've had 2 debates. Everybody knows who he is, and I'm going to do issue forms instead. I don't think she has to do that, but I think there's actually a case that would drive him even crazier.
I think that's smart, actually. It would be unwelcome to the institutional forces behind these debates, which have become more than they were back in that day. But with the commission and the networks and all that stuff. But
it would tame them a little, though, because cable wouldn't have another carnival to pimp.
Yeah, that would be the ultimate four-corner, and it would be a way to kind of smother them. First of all, I think that final debate in Vegas, coming when it is on October 19th, is probably superfluous. And I think he has knowing him, I don't think he's going with the mindset that I know I'm going down, but I want to make a good accounting of myself and my party and present my vision for the future in a way that really inspires people. I think he's going to grab the kerosene and the torch and let's go.
I think, she doesn't do it, again, which is what Nixon did to McGovern, told him to go, have a joint, no time, I got to, be the grown-up. And Trump debates the empty chair in Vegas. I think I could get odds at the sports book 50-50.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, I hadn't really thought about that. It's an interesting option.
I'm just kind of musing aloud here. All right, last question on the Trumpster. Do you think he wins any of the 7 swing states now? I'm going to include North Carolina, which isn't normally a swing state, but I define them as Ohio, Florida, Colorado, Virginia, North Carolina, New Hampshire.
Yeah, I think he does not. I think even Ohio, which I thought 2 weeks ago he was going to win, I don't think he'll win. The question now is, does the thing get bad enough to put Arizona or Georgia in play? That's a more appropriate question for today than does he carry any of the swing states? You and I were together just last week, and the day before this, or a few days before, I guess, the tape was released. And, I was somewhat more guarded about this, though. What I said then was we'll know very quickly, because if on election night Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania come in, and she's carried them all, I think it's game, set, and match. But now I don't think there's a lot of mystery there. Now I think it's a question of, does she add to the Obama number? Obama got 332 electoral votes last time. North Carolina would add 13, and then you got Arizona and Georgia. Incredibly, given the fact that she's had her own challenges, she could have a pretty big night.
Yeah, I think she is in the hunt in, North Carolina, and she could become, if he doubles down on the Breitbart, hair on fire campaign, and all these signs are he will, then it's going to be a squeaker, I think, in Georgia and Arizona.
And your old client, John McCain's decision to part company with Trump, obviously played out there. And it does give a permission structure to those Republicans who are cross-pressured to walk away from Trump.
Yeah, if I were her, and I'm not, and again, I am not for her, but I am resigned to her because she's better than Trump by a galactic mile. Sending the dog whistle now to Republicans is important. And if I were them, I would not be as obsessed with turnout. Democrats are always obsessed with turnout because when marginal voters show up, you harvest more of them, as you well know better than anybody. But I would put Elizabeth Warren back in the lead box in Cambridge and stop blowing that whistle. And Tim Kaine should be, visiting Milton Friedman's honorary classroom at Chicago or something to just...
We would welcome him.
This will be interesting. Any Senate upsets? I think even with this Trump meltdown, though, as it gets worse, my hopes are dimming. I think there's still hope for a few of the senators who have created their own identity. Kelly did the right thing, late, but the right thing in New Hampshire. Are you super confident you guys are going to take the Senate? Or do you think we have at least a fighting chance?
I would have said, look, when we were together the other day, I said
right.
I wasn't overwhelmingly confident about it. I thought that Democrats were favorites, but not heavy favorites. Now I think Democrats are in a much stronger position. And I think two of the, there are two senators who could potentially, I think Rubio could withstand the onslaught, assuming that Florida doesn't get too far away. Although I don't know about that. Maybe Indiana.
You have a
seems
flawed Murphy there, which is a rare thing, but a fairly flawed Murphy is the Democratic candidate.
Yeah,
Florida.
I know him. He's a nice young guy, but he obviously took some big hits. I mean, one of the byproducts of the walking away from Trump is that there's going to be money to burn for these Senate candidates, and Rubio will have everything he needs. I think that Young in Indiana against Bai that's one state where Trump hasn't completely tanked. So that's maybe, but then and you have Pence, right? Although not a terribly popular governor there. But the states that are interesting are North Carolina. I think Burr has a real problem there. And could be, the state, it's not just the presidential race, but the governor's race is going badly for them there.
Burr is the one who should not be in trouble, but he is in trouble. And that could be the one that even if we have miracles in other places where we have a, unforced error on our side.
I saw a poll from Pennsylvania that had her up 12. I don't see how Toomey survives that, honestly.
Well, I think I'm working that because I'm doing Bloomberg's IE for Toomey, and we have it a lot closer. But if there's a 12-foot Trump wall of water coming in on election day, that's hard for anybody. And Toomey's a guy who I think should take the walk, though. I can't communicate. I'm not working directly for him.
But I'm sure he's a regular listener of your program.
We dictate our terms to the Senate here at Radio Free GOP.
The other state, Mike, that I think is interesting is Missouri, where Blunt is running against this young guy, Kander, a young state official who's run a very, very good campaign. I don't know if you saw the ad they did. Mark Putnam did an ad for him where he blindfolded, put together an assault rifle because he had been in the military, and he talked about that, but talked about why he was for background checks. It's a great ad, but he's an attractive candidate. I think that could be a sleeper race. I think the one in New Hampshire is going to be close, and if Hillary runs up the score there, I think there's no doubt Ayotte is a strong candidate, but I think the governor could potentially take her there. And I think Illinois is very tough for Republicans. I think Wisconsin, Feingold, I would bet on him. So, at the end of the day, I think Trump has put in jeopardy enough seats that it's going to be tough for Republicans to hold the Senate. I think it's going to be harder for Democrats to obviously take over the House. They need 30 seats, but they could get 20.
Look, it's getting bigger as Trump implodes, but he'd have to actually invite his, bromance Putin to come campaign with him to lose the House. I think.
Well,
I think the odds are small.
You'd think Putin would.
It's a love affair. Well, let's pivot right now to the big finish of this thing and tell me a little bit. Well, first, let me do an ad. This is shameless, but we've been talking about appearing together, making some of these predictions. It is true. You can bring the Axelrod and Murphy bipartisan pro wrestling match to your group if you fork over a lot of money to the Washington Speakers Bureau. So that's where you find us. And it's pretty good, complete with pyrotechnics and a big dance number to finish. No Judy Garland black leotards for us, unless the price is right. Then we're open to offers. Let's talk about the Institute, because you have put away your metaphorical axe to now have an academic one. I'm happy to be on the board of this fine institute. Why don't you talk about it a little bit?
After the campaign of 2012, I started this Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. It's an extracurricular program, and it's nonpartisan, and the whole purpose of it is to try and encourage young people to turn into politics and into public service and into the public engagement, civic engagement, rather than to turn away from it. I think we have the most public-spirited group of young people I've seen since I was a kid in the 60s, but they are skeptical about whether politics is the way to make a difference, and they've seen a lot of bad role models. And, our purpose is to bring practitioners of all stripes to the campus and expose young people to different ideas and to stories, and to give them pathways of engagement, make contacts, and so on. We have fellows who come and spend a quarter. For example, Bruce Reed, who is Joe Biden's chief of staff and head of the Domestic Policy Council under Bill Clinton, is there. Mike Morrell, the former acting director of the CIA, was there. We have a couple of your old colleagues who are great Republican consultants talking about campaigns.
You have Liesl Hickey, former executive director of Right to Rise. Yeah, she's great. I do.
She is great. And so, and then we have an internship program, and that's a huge thing. We've put more than 800 kids in internships in the White House and on Capitol Hill, cabinet agencies, in various think tanks from right to left, and foreign embassies, and so on. U.S. embassies overseas, I should say, city halls, state houses, and media organizations. And these have opened up career paths for these young people. We're beginning to see it. Kids going into the media, into the State Department, into all kinds of politically related activities. So our goal is to spawn a generation of leadership. And, I'd love to see these institutes of politics all over the country. But we're doing really, really well at the University of Chicago, in part because of the generosity of folks like you, Mike. We've had over 600 speakers since January of 2012. I've got Ron Brownstein there tomorrow to talk about the election demographics, along with Dan Wagner, who was the head of analytics for Obama in 2012. So that'll be an interesting conversation. And it's really a pleasure to.
Oh, it's great. Look, I've been proud to serve on the board, and I have taught there, and I can tell you, it is an incredible opportunity for the students. It is truly bipartisan because Chicago has such a strong econ department. The place is crawling with rebellious Republicans. I'm sure some
home of
listening.
Milton Friedman.
It is, absolutely. So here, I'm going to do a far more worthy plug, just spontaneously here, than the shameless appeal for our speeches.
That doesn't involve fishnet stockings.
Yeah, no. Well, again, if the price is right for the Institute.
All right.
The Republican resistance, our listenerships include some highly successful people who love this country and are a bit bummed out by the horrible course and depressing nature of politics. If you want to invest in the next generation, and Axelrod didn't put me up to this. This is my idea to make this plug. You should talk to these guys because they're building an endowment for this thing, and it is a treasure, and it is in the national interest, and that of both parties. David, who do they reach out to? Do you have anybody there who kind of handles wayward billionaires who decide to
we would even take wayward millionaires. Steve Edwards, our splendid executive director, is the right guy to talk to. You can reach him at Stephen Edwards at uchicago.edu or at his office, at our office on the campus, 773-702-9585. And I should point out, I kind of buried the lead. Among those speakers have been people you've worked with. Mitt Romney was a speaker there. We've had Newt Gingrich was there, and a variety of speakers from the right to the left. To the vice president was there. Joe Biden, indeed Elizabeth Warren was there, and folks between. And so it is genuinely. In fact, I just had Gary Johnson there last week, which was interesting. He's on my podcast this week, for those of you who are interested.
Was there a cloud of blue smoke following him a little bit?
Well, you listen to the podcast and decide for yourself.
Yeah, and it is a great podcast. The Axe Files, you can find it on iTunes or any podcast platform.
And that's done in conjunction with the Institute of Politics and CNN.
Excellent. You're on CNN as a commentator. And, of course, Axe wrote a great book, Believer, which I recommend for anybody trying to get into politics. So last question for you, and then we'll sign off. I asked the same question to Shrum. I close a lot of the interviews with it. What do you tell a young person, maybe you get a lot of these questions at the Institute, who wants to get into politics? How do you tell them to do it?
The best way to do it is to find a candidate or a campaign in which you believe. And I think smaller is better than larger. And volunteer. If you can't get a job, volunteer to work in that campaign. And do every job that you can. Do every gritty job that no one else wants to do, and you will quickly advance in that organization. You will learn a lot. You will meet people who will remember you. That is the best way to get into this. It is one of these things where you learn by doing, and it's a great experience. I wrote a book called Believer because I believe in this, and democracy is messy and frustrating. We're experiencing that now, but there's something very energizing about it and inspiring about it as well. And, so I urge everyone who has an interest to jump in there and become a part of this process.
I couldn't agree more. No job too small. And when in doubt, head to a state capital. You don't have to race to Washington. Well, the Orthodoxy police are closing in. I see Kellyanne Fitzpatrick and Steve Bannon in the original Batmobile outside trying to find our secret location. So we're going to shut down. David, thank you so much for being on Radio
Always
Free.
Good to be with you.
It's number one for rumors and fun. It's Resistance Podcasting, Radio Free GOP.
All right, I'm going to be quick. The Orthodoxy police are closing in. There's a bounty on my head and Axelrod's. I can't believe we're in the same undisclosed location, but we will easily elude them. I will be back next week in a new undisclosed location. Until then, start thinking about show trials. We are going to build a reformed conservative Republican Party that can win elections after this debacle. And in 2018, we're going to take a lot of Democratic seats back. Until then, keep up the fight. Don't give up. Keep fighting for those senators. And remember, in the end, victory will be ours. I'm Mike Murphy. Thank you for listening.
Radio Free GOP. The resistance sound all campaign long.
This has been Radio Free GOP, the voice of the Republican resistance, with your host, Mike Murphy.